Welcome to the 20th episode of Ravenna Review, a program of stories, features, and book reviews. My name is Robert Boucheron. I will be your host for a half hour of reading aloud excerpts from issue 10 with illustrations and author photographs. The print magazine Ravenna Review is published 4 times a year in Charlottesville, Virginia, on the Ravenna River. I am the editor. The magazine is available in bookstores, on the Main Street Mall in Charlottesville, and elsewhere in Virginia. You can order a copy or a subscription from the website, ravennareview.com. Contributors to the magazine live all over the world and they write about places far and wide. This episode has a story set in a basement toy workshop in Oregon and 3 essays. George Eliot, the English novelist, gives her opinion on storytelling. We then visit present-day utopian communes in Virginia and the Florida Department of Education on teaching the history of slavery in America. 2 book reviews assess stories about strangers by Jen Michalski and stories about life as salvage by Vauhini Vara. Story, The Fisherman's Gift by Eric Witchey. Memories live on each worn step into the low-ceiling basement of Uncle Alden's house in the Oregon town where I grew up. No memory of that dry, cool space includes silence. Each step takes me deeper into the new stillness, away from the respectful murmurs and shuffling of mourners in the rooms above. As if memory can reproduce sounds and smells, the place is filled with the tinkering taps of hammers, whirring tools, scuffling feet, whistles, bells, ozone, the chuffing of model steam engines pretending to be larger than they are, and the sweet scent of aromatic oils that burn to make the models smoke. On a visit long ago with my mother, while she talked to her sister-in-law on the kitchen, I snuck away and managed the stairs alone. I found Uncle Alden there, among the toys he restored to their long-ago shine and wonder. He smiled, met me on the creaking wooden steps, lifted me into his broad embrace, and kissed my cheek. He had just shaved, and his cologne was toy grease, Old Spice, and cherry tobacco pipe smoke. I touched his cheek with tiny fingers. It was smooth and fresh. Another silent, descending step, and I remember being a little older. I was angry my mother had made me hike with him through the woods to a stream in Oregon's Cascade Range, Eagle Creek. But we saw no eagles. Standing in dry grass up to my knees, I accepted a fly rod half the length of his. He showed me how to flick the tip to make a few feet of line coil and whip to settle a cumbersome white-winged black fly on small bubbling ripples near the bank. "That's wrong," I said. "I've seen fly fishing on TV. You have to whip the line back and forth and way out." Uncle Alden waited while I learned how wrong I was. Then he sat with me. His patient fingers pushed, tugged, and slipped loops of line in and out of other loops of line. "Untangling is part of fishing," he said. "I think untangling might be the whole point of fishing." I stopped trying to cast like people on TV and instead did what he told me. The 3rd time I flipped the fly, it landed 6 inches from the bank. Upset, I started to pull it back, but a trout as long as my forearm gulped it down, impaled itself on the hook, and fought for its life. I cried the whole time because I wanted to catch it, to show I could, to make my mother proud. At the same time, I wanted to be home in my room, reading, talking with my friends, and away from wounded animals, cold water, tall ferns, and wet moss. For the duration of the struggle with that silvery, red-sided creature, I didn't know who I was. With a net, he plucked it from the water, wet his hands, gently gripped the animal, and deftly slipped the hook free. He kept the trout in the water to give me a moment to catch my breath before he lifted it so I could look at the animal, imprint its sleek beauty into memory along with him, cradling it in a wet hand while smiling. "It will be okay," he said. "It was just a pinprick." A moment later, before I could untangle my emotions and decide I wanted to keep it to show my mother, he spoke to the fish. "Thank you for playing with us." He slipped it back into the stream. A flash of red, a flick of tail, and it was gone. Essay, Storytelling by George Eliot. What is the best way of telling a story? Since the standard must be the interest of the audience, there must be several or many good ways rather than one best. For we get interested in the stories life presents to us through diverse orders and modes of presentation. Very commonly, our first awakening to a desire of knowing a man's past or future comes from our seeing him as a stranger in some unusual or pathetic or humorous situation, or manifesting some remarkable characteristics. We make inquiries in consequence, or we become observant and attentive whenever opportunities of knowing more may happen to present themselves without our search. You have seen a refined face among the prisoners picking tow in jail. You afterwards see the same unforgettable face in a pulpit. He must be of dull fiber who would not care to know more about a life which showed such contrasts, though he might gather his knowledge in a fragmentary and unchronological way. Again, we have heard much, or at least something not quite common, about a man whom we have never seen, and hence we look round with curiosity when we are told that he is present. Whatever he says or does before us is charged with a meaning due to our previous hearsay knowledge about him, gathered either from dialogue of which he was expressly and emphatically the subject, or from incidental remark, or from general report, either in or out of print. These indirect ways of arriving at knowledge are always the most stirring, even in relation to impersonal subjects. To see a chemical experiment gives an attractiveness to a definition of chemistry and fills it with a significance which it would never have had without the pleasant shock of an unusual sequence, such as the transformation of a solid into gas, and vice versa. To see a word for the first time, either as substantive or adjective, in a connection where we care about knowing its complete meaning, is the way to vivify its meaning in our recollection. Curiosity becomes the more eager from the incompleteness of the first information. Moreover, it is in this way that memory works in its incidental revival of events. Some salient experience appears in inward vision, and in consequence the antecedent facts are retraced from what is regarded as the beginning of the episode in which that experience made a more or less strikingly memorable part. Ah, I remember addressing the mob from the hustings at Westminster. You wouldn't have thought that I could ever have been in such a position. Well, how I came there was in this way. And then follows a retrospective narration. The modes of telling a story, founded on these processes of outward and inward life, derive their effectiveness from the superior mastery of images and pictures in grasping the attention. Or one might say, with more fundamental accuracy, that our earliest, strongest impressions, our most intimate convictions, are simply images added to more or less of sensation. These are the primitive instruments of thought. Hence, it is not surprising that early poetry took this way, telling a daring deed, a glorious achievement, without caring for what went before. The desire for orderly narration is a later, more reflective birth. The presence of the jack-in-the-box affects every child. It is the more reflective lad, the miniature philosopher, who wants to know how he got there. The only stories life presents to us in an orderly way are those of our autobiography, or the career of our companions from our childhood upwards, or perhaps of our own children. But it is a great art to make a connected, strictly relevant narrative of such careers as we can recount from the beginning. In these cases, the sequence of associations is almost sure to overmaster the sense of proportion. Such narratives ab ovo are summer's day stories for happy loungers, not the cup of self-forgetting excitement to the busy who can snatch an hour of entertainment. But the simple opening of a story with a date and necessary account of places and people, passing on quietly towards the more rousing elements of narrative and dramatic presentation, without need of retrospect, has its advantages, which have to be measured by the nature of the story. Spirited narrative, without more than a touch of dialogue here and there, may be made eminently interesting. Slavery in the Florida Department of Education by Thomas Larson. The Florida Department of Education issued a middle school curriculum directive in July 2023 that says, quote, slaves developed skills which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit, unquote. The skilled trades mentioned include blacksmiths, shoemakers, fishing and shipping industry workers, tailors, and teachers. The vast majority of slaves in the American South were field hands, unskilled farm laborers. The Florida Education Association, a statewide teachers' union, said the new standards are a disservice to Florida's students and are a big step backward. Others, including Vice President Kamala Harris, have spoken against the document. FDE board members might have consulted Angela Davis's 1971 essay, Reflections on the Black Woman's Role in the Community of Slaves. 50 years ago, Davis cataloged how black women resisted the shackles. Among the first scholars to gather the evidence, she argued that a woman, daughter, wife, mother, was equal to a man in undermining the slaveholder, surreptitiously and openly at her peril. Quote, if she was burned, hanged, broken on the wheel, her head paraded on poles before her brothers and sisters, she must have also felt the wedge of this counterinsurgence as a fact of her daily existence, unquote. Where did the woman's skill in improvising defiance using wiles and deceit come from? Obviously, such resistance wasn't taught by any master or wife and was not read to her from a chapter on treachery in the McGuffey Readers published in Cincinnati in the 1830s and 1840s. Her refusal to kowtow lies in the organic ingenuity and duplicity oppressed people adopt. Any personal benefit was invented on the spot by her and for her family and her community. According to Davis, here are some of the tactics women parlayed against the master and his mistress: poisoning food and medicine with subtle folk remedies, feigning praise to earn and undermine trust, caretaking children with moral instruction and compassion in opposition to the depravity of their slaver parents, disrupting schedules and household tasks, pilfering, breaking tools, burning the oatmeal, fouling crops, slowing work details, exercising indolence, and other acts of domestic sabotage. Some women rebelled outright. They started fires in homes and outbuildings as payback or as cover for revolts. They hid runaways and staffed escape routes. They coached children how to feign illness, and a few killed their babies rather than have them endure a life of forced labor. These things are hardly what the Florida Board of Education means by personal benefits. Their policy is fashioned by authoritarian conservatives, white nationalists gaslighting history as racial propaganda. They are speaking to parents who think fair-mindedness is in order when teaching American slavery to their children. They, the right wing, will play any perverse race card to rehabilitate the slavers and prolong the lost cause. Surely, there were kind masters here and there. Florida's fair-minded argue that eventually freed Americans were given tenant farming as means of moneyed indenture. Though the advance was very slow, the manumitted did receive schooling, literacy, gun rights, the vote for black men, as well as segregated public accommodations, including toilets, transportation, hotels, swimming pools, parks, plus their own towns and business districts. And the most astonishing consequence of working people to the bone, Africans in the southern states birthed a world-renowned artistic child, the blues, jazz, gospel, and soul, which we now regard as the core of American music. Surely, some of these developments were positive. Such logic of the Trumpian Orwellian revisionist variety, which enables suffering and dilutes involvement, is fuzzy, full of holes, and a source of sardonic humor. Essay, Utopia in Virginia by Sybil Chambers. Twin Oaks Community, founded in 1967 in Louisa County, Virginia, is a survival of the hippie communes of that era. The Farm, founded in 1971 in Summertown, Tennessee, was another and probably the biggest. The Farm is the subject of the 2013 documentary film American Commune. It shrank and reorganized in 1983 as a cooperative. Twin Oaks is still a commune and economically successful. It has a working farm where they grow vegetables and flowers, run a dairy herd, and produce heirloom seeds. And it has factories where they make hammocks, wood furniture, and tofu from soybeans grown elsewhere. Membership is capped at 100 adults with a waiting list for applicants. At Twin Oaks, the original impulse was to make B.F. Skinner's utopian novel Walden 2 a reality. The system of labor credits and production managers is the only Skinnerian idea that remains intact. They gave up social engineering. The early years saw a village-like approach to child rearing, where most adults acted as parents and teachers. In 2021, Twin Oaks reported 15 children. Goals for ethnic diversity are elusive. Twin Oaks was for some years a haven for middle-class whites who dropped out. They indulged in frolics, live music, nudity, free sex, and a complete lack of social restraint. Shabby buildings scattered in the woods and bickering among the residents make a poor impression. The farm is the centerpiece. Twin Oaks confounds the received wisdom. It has never had a cult leader, one dominant personality, nor does it have a common religion, a public ritual, or even much of a political structure. It has a high turnover rate of residents, up to 30% in some years. Like monasteries, it has an aging population. The secret seems to be financial good sense, coupled with strict rules on communal ownership of property. Contrary to the idea of a hippie commune, Twin Oaks has never tolerated drugs. The founders were acutely aware of the legal risk, and they saw it as a matter of survival. In this respect, Twin Oaks is typical of communes, which lack the resources to deal with alcohol and drug abuse. In pastoral Buckingham County, Virginia, an hour's drive south of Charlottesville and 2 hours west of Richmond, is a Hindu ashram called Yogaville. A complex of housing, shrines, schools, and businesses, the ashram sprawls over 750 acres beside the James River. The centerpiece of Yogaville is the Light of Truth Universal Shrine, or Lotus, open to the public. Completed in 1986, the shrine is a rare example of Indian-style architecture in Virginia. Soon after his arrival in the United States from India in 1966, Swami Sachidananda Saraswati conceived the idea of a shrine to all faiths as a counterpart to his ecumenical teaching. He considered sites in California, Connecticut, and elsewhere. Some of these were donated to the community, but each had limitations. On a land hunting expedition in 1979, Sachidananda spotted the Buckingham property from an airplane. The farm had the right combination of water, plain, hill orientation, and mild Virginia climate. Later, on learning that the land was for sale, he felt that his intuitive choice was confirmed. The first few years at Yogaville were hard. Everyone lived crowded in the old farmhouse or in trailers. By 1982, conditions had improved, and work started on Lotus. A guidebook describes its inception, construction, and dedication ceremony. In the Visitor Center, a 10-minute video includes live documentary footage. Sachidananda designed every aspect with the help of architect James Jagadish McCabe. Construction lasted 4 years with extensive earth moving and design revisions. The result is as much landscape as building. The shrine is set in the floodplain of the James River with extensive planting, areas of grass, paved paths, and fountains. The striking form, a dome rising from a low hill, derives from the ancient stupa. Here, an azure dome is surrounded by a ring of lotus petals, painted pink, set in a basin of water. More triangular petals extend horizontally. A caption in the guidebook says, "The lotus appears to be floating like a flower in a lotus pond." Eco Village Charlottesville calls itself a community space and future residents promoting ecological, social, economic, and cultural sustainability, unquote. A handful of older people live in an existing house. The fledgling community hopes to develop 6.5 acres bordering the city with 24 residential units. They host potluck suppers, musical and educational events in topics like green building and skills workshops in gardening, canning, composting, and child rearing. Book Review by Edward Lineberry, The Company of Strangers by Jen Michalski. Most of the stories in this collection center around love, or at least deep friendships, yet there are no happily ever afters here. These are lovers and friends caught up in circumstances beyond their control, living through mistakes and traumas, finding a detente grudgingly carved out of life events. Jen Michalski is a novelist, short story writer, and editor of the literary magazine JMWW. Michalski is an experienced and capable writer with an eye for the details that shape her characters' lives and an ear for original metaphor. In Your Second Left Fielder, while back in her hometown for a wedding, Alex reconnects with childhood friend Dickie, who barely remembers her. Over drinks, they talk about what became of each their Little League teammates. One teammate, a developmentally delayed girl named Denise, dominates their conversation. She was the second left fielder, a position that does not exist in the game, in addition to the standard rules to make room for a piece that does not fit, an effort at inclusivity. The narration unfolds with an unusual point of view, not quite second person, more of an epistle to the narrator's future self. Quote, "Let's be clear, this story isn't about Denise. She is a peripheral character. Perhaps everyone is, and that would make you the protagonist. But what has changed, what challenge you are facing really, except you saw Dickie Richards, the pitcher on your co-ed Little League team, the 1982 Eastwood Orioles, at the Exxon station," unquote. A common thread among the characters in this collection is that they are not in control of their destinies, are swept up by traumas from their past and desires in the present. Caught in reminiscences of the past with Dickie, Alex goes back to his house where they concoct a coke-fueled plan to visit Denise. Missing the rehearsal dinner, she and Dickie attempt to break into Denise's locked apartment. The visit now a rescue mission. In one of the shortest stories of the collection, an aging rock star attempts to gain control of her legacy and her present situation. She works now as a bartender, but still plays, maybe better than she ever has before. Her audience now remembers her from YouTube videos of her MTV appearances, and they come to hear her one hit, an anthem to not caring. Quote, "They haven't come for you, they came for 1994. When you and all those other bands were kind of famous. They came to remember how uncomplicated their lives were, full of promise, because promise is light as air, before it becomes a real thing. Rocks in their pockets, in their shoes, so much of what they thought they wanted. Doctorates, marriage, children, mortgages, now weighing them down," unquote. It is a story that packs a punch over a sparse 3 pages, an old theme of reconciling youth and what didn't matter then with what matters now, told with language and style that is fresh and memorable. A standout in this collection is Scheherazade, in which Dan, a college professor with a stepdaughter, enters a complex relationship with his colleague Regina. Dan has adopted a philosophy of yes. Quote, "All his life he said yes to things, baseball, pot, surfing, sex, dirt bikes, road trips, college, LSD. He's not sure where it's all gotten him, except a bunch of crazy stories," unquote. Caught in a trap of his own making, he says yes to Regina and is left to pick up the pieces of another failed relationship and find balance in the harm he caused. Book review by Janice Obuchowski. This is Salvaged by Vauhini Vara. Vauhini Vara follows her debut novel, The Immortal King Rao, with the story collection This is Salvaged. The title implicitly asks, what is salvaged? Throughout the 10 stories, that's what we discover. In the aftermath of tragedy and crisis, characters look to rescue something from the wreckage in order to go on living. The writing, laced with a beautiful absurdism, reveals people who don't face loss and sadness nobly or with stoicism, but who instead often make ludicrous, if moving, decisions. They grab what they can and try to build something from it. The title story depicts an artist, Marlon, who creates installations he intends to be permanent, his medium being the fragile and perishable. In a panicked moment, he realizes only rich people look at his art, and they haven't experienced enough loss to understand its point. So he leaves his wife and, after dreaming he will build an ark, he begins. Here we have the story's first salvaging, one of several. During the next 3 years, Marlon constructs this ark. As he does so, he falls in love with a young woman who is 23 and emotionally adrift, after her parents died within a year of one another from cancer and suicide. As his work concludes, Marlon's excitement about it and his love life wane, so once more he destroys his art and his relationship. An image near the story's conclusion is especially resonant. Marlon sees the ark on fire, and while he sees his burning as beautiful as he had thought it would be when he dreamed it up, the great masterpiece of his life, he also finds it frightening. The blackness that the pieces, as they sparked and fell off, was scarier than any black he'd seen in his life. Not blacker, but more frightening. It was an annihilating blackness. Marlon sees a sophisticated truth, this conflation of beauty and annihilation, and yet doesn't glean from it anything that lets him live a better life. At the story's end, he seems no wiser, only capable of repeating the cycle of creation and destruction. In The Irates, a teenage girl, Swati, needs to escape her parents' house in the wake of her brother's death. With her friend Lydia, she begins work as part of a telemarketing scam, making calls from a room located above a Chinese restaurant at the behest of a grown man, Orlando, who's dating Jing, the daughter of the restaurant's owner. Orlando and Jing have plans to run a phone sex hotline and eventually to employ the girls in that capacity, but only after they've worked their way up from first selling fake magazines and Hawaiian vacations to anyone they can keep on the line. The parallels in these two stories reveal some of the collection's broader themes. In both, the main character has a dark epiphany that doesn't allow for improvement or betterment. As The Irates concludes, Swati thinks, "I had traveled a vast distance to escape my foul house, only to discover I hadn't escaped the foulness at all. It had followed me here. It would follow me, I was beginning to understand, everywhere I went." As well, minor characters carry terrible loss. As Glenda lost both of her parents, Jing lost her mother. She was taken during the Guangxi massacre. And Jing's father and Jing subsequently had to escape the country. Swati's friend Lydia is also grieving the loss of Swati's brother. This is salvaged, is bracing in its treatment of darkness, but also filled with quickness and wit.